Katja Sviridzenka, the Deputy Mission Chief for Sri Lanka. Let me turn to Peter now, who will start with some opening remarks.
Thank you, Martha, and thank you all for being here on a Saturday. We appreciate your interest in our work. It's always a pleasure to engage with you. So today I thought I'd start on a personal note. This summer I had a chance to travel through Sri Lanka with my family and have now seen many different parts of the country. And what stood out to me was the remarkable resilience with which people tackle the daily challenges that they face every day. The enormous challenges of the country are reflected in their lives. But while it was clear from my travels that a lot needs to be done, I would like to commend the Sri Lankan people and authorities who have taken forward an ambitious reform program that has helped put Sri Lanka's economy on the track for recovery. Completing the reform agenda to achieve more inclusive and sustainable growth will benefit all Sri Lankans, including the many I encountered during my travels. Now with this, let me turn to my initial remarks. As Martha mentioned, we are here in Colombo at the third review of the 4-year IMF-supported program. We had discussions with the authorities and a broad spectrum of stakeholders, including parliamentarians, representatives from the private sector, civil society organizations, and development partners. Now, with respect to the outcome of the discussions we have had with the authorities, I'm pleased to share with you that we have reached staff-level agreement with the Sri Lankan authorities on the third review under the 4-year Extended Fund Facility supported program. I would like to highlight that the agreement at the staff level is subject to the approval of by IMF management and the IMF Executive Board. Completion of the review by the IMF Executive Board requires the implementation by the authorities of prior actions, including the submission of a 2025 budget consistent with program objectives, and it also requires confirming that the program remains adequately financed. Upon completion of the Executive Board review, Sri Lanka would have access to about $330 million. This would bring IMF financial support disbursed under the arrangement to a total of about $1.3 billion. In terms of the macroeconomic situation, Sri Lanka's ambitious reform agenda supported by the EFF is delivering commendable outcomes. The economy expanded on average by 4% year-on-year in the 4 quarters ending in June of this year, and high-frequency indicators point to continued expansion across all sectors. Average headline and core inflation remain contained at 0.8% and 3.8% during the third quarter. Gross official reserves increased to $6.4 billion at the end of October, with sizable foreign exchange purchases by the central bank. Public finances have strengthened following substantial fiscal reforms. Now turning to progress with respect to the reform agenda under the EFF, I would like to point out that program performance has been strong. All quantitative performance criteria and indicative targets for end June 2024 were met, except for the target on social spending. And similarly, the targets for end September 2024 were met, except for the one on social spending. Most structural benchmarks due before October were either met or implemented with delay. Some benchmarks are delayed because of the election cycle. I would like to note that the new government's commitment to the program objectives has enhanced confidence and ensures policy continuity. Sustaining the reform momentum is critical to safeguarding the hard-won gains of the program. It is also critical to put the economy on a path towards lasting recovery and stable and inclusive growth. Since the crisis has affected Sri Lanka's entire population, it will be important to ensure that the benefits from the economic growth are shared appropriately across the population. Maintaining macroeconomic stability and restoring debt sustainability are key to securing Sri Lanka's prosperity and require persevering with responsible fiscal policy. Continued revenue mobilization efforts and spending restraint are needed to prepare the 2025 budget in line with program objectives. Revenue administration reforms and efforts to improve tax compliance will help to ensure that the burden stemming from the crisis is shared proportionately to taxpayers' ability to contribute. Avoiding new tax exemptions will help reduce fiscal revenue leakages, corruption risks, and build much-needed fiscal buffers, including for social spending, and to support Sri Lanka's most vulnerable. Maintaining cost recovery in fuel and electricity pricing and resolving legacy debts will help minimize fiscal risk arising. Now, let me emphasize here that the government has an important responsibility to protect the poor and vulnerable at this difficult time. It is important to redouble efforts to meet the program's minimum spending target on social spending and to improve targeting, adequacy, and coverage of social safety nets, particularly Asvisuma. Regarding inflation, it has decelerated faster than expected. However, continued monitoring is warranted to ensure sustained price stability and to support macroeconomic stability. Against ongoing global uncertainty, it remains important to continue rebuilding external buffers through strong reserve accumulation. Regarding the debt restructuring process, Sri Lanka's recent agreement in principle with bondholders is an important milestone. It puts Sri Lanka's debt on a path towards sustainability. The critical next steps are to complete the commercial debt restructuring, finalize bilateral agreements with official creditors along the lines of the accord with the official and implement the terms of the other agreements. This will help restore Sri Lanka's debt sustainability. Finally, the new government's mandate will reinvigorate governance reforms addressing corruption risks, rebuilding economic confidence, and making growth more robust and inclusive. I would like to thank the authorities and all our counterparts for the excellent collaboration. And with this, let me hand it back to Martin.
Thank you very much, Peter. Now let me open the floor for questions. May I please ask if you can raise your hand if you have a question, and before you ask your question, it would be great if you could introduce yourself, share your media affiliation. Thank you very much.
Shiharan is from Economy Next. From the completion of the third review to approval of the fourth disbursement, what are the steps, what are the conditions on Sri Lankan part to complete?
Thank you very much. Let's take a couple more questions, please.
Indika Sakalasuri from Economy Next. There were talks that the new government was the percentage. So there is came in.
Thank you very much. Maybe one more question.
Just a couple of questions, if you don't mind.
Yes.
Emphasize the need for structural reforms when it comes to public sector state-owned enterprises and even tax collection. What tangible results have you seen the government achieve, and how do you assess the government's commitment to implementing these reforms? And also the new monetary policies. How does this affect review? Question. The previous government said that vehicle import restrictions will be lifted by February 2025. If the current government goes ahead with it, does the IMF recommendations comply with it?
Could you repeat the question,
The first
please?
one, actually.
Can you repeat all of them?
The first two.
Thank you.
Yes. The exercise when it comes to public sector management, state-owned enterprises, and tax collection. So what tangible results have been achieved in these areas so far? And how do you assess the government's commitment to implementing these reforms in a timely manner? The second question is that the new government is yet to lay out their foreign and monetary policies. So how does that affect the IMF review? The final question is that the previous government said that vehicle import restrictions will be lifted by February 2025. So if the current government goes ahead with that decision, will this comply with the IMF recommendations?
Thank you very much. Very clear. Let me turn to Peter. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, no, thank you very much. So, what are the steps between now and disbursement under the third review, which will be the fourth disbursement? So, there are some prior actions, and those relate mostly to the budget. So, because of the elections, the budget process is taking place later this year. So we will be interested in convincing ourselves that this budget is in line with the program objectives. So we'll be having a very close discussion with the authorities on that. But this is also now in line with the second question. The authorities have committed to stay within the guardrails of the program, meaning important guardrails are the primary surplus, the revenue, and also the quality of the fiscal measures. And within those guardrails, we have agreed on a package that allows them to achieve their priorities and objectives. And that will eventually be documented in the budget that the government is preparing. And as soon as that is submitted to Parliament, it will then be possible to go ahead with the process for the fourth review. In the meantime, of course, we will do our part in terms of preparing the underlying staff report and consulting with the appropriate stakeholders. So why don't you go ahead? Yeah.
With regard to the question on the structural reforms, particularly in the areas of public sector management, state-owned enterprises, and tax collections, just to name a few, there's been a lot of reforms already adopted by the government. For example, the new Public Financial Management Act will instill principles of good governance and transparency into Sri Lanka's public finances. Cost recovery energy pricing is an important pillar of the IMF-supported program to reduce the fiscal risks from state-owned enterprises, to make sure that they're no longer a burden on the public finances and taxpayer. Legacy debts of the SOEs are also being repaid and resolved, further reducing those risks. There's been significant effort to improve tax collection and improve governance in the various tax collecting agencies. So overall, we see a clear commitment of the government to the structural reform and improving governance and accountability in the public financial management. Thank you.
So on the other two questions, so monetary policy, of course, remains in the purview of the central bank, and this government has committed to or reaffirmed its commitment to the independence of the central bank, which of course is a very important pillar under the program. This is one of those hard-won gains with the Central Bank Act having passed last year. Of course, the area of lifting the import restrictions on motor vehicles, that is a decision by the government that has implications with respect to monetary policy. So yes, that is a part that we have discussed. In fact, we have already discussed in the previous lifting restrictions will be a source for the government. So it's one of the sort of big, more opportunity to raise revenue in Sri Lanka. Of course, it needs to be managed carefully. The reserves of the country. Yeah, we stop there.
Thank you very much. Yeah, let's take another round of questions, please.
Yeah, Marwan Mark of Nikkei Asia. You've praised the government for sticking to the commitments of the previous government to continue with the program, but there's a larger political question at play here. The former president, who did a fairly good job in how he position, whereas you have a current president, a new government that has come into power on a sweeping landslide mandate. What kind of space would the new government have to adjust the program if, say, your targets result in a crippling of the growth, and may have to adjust some of the targets, given that the mandate the current government enjoys is substantially much more larger and more secure than the predecessor? Thanks.
I'm Prasad from Rupavahini National Television. You mentioned about the missing the targets of social spending area in the previous two occasions. But now there's a new government in power, and they also have made during the election the social area. How can you the situation in your program according with the government's program?
A follow-up to Marwan's question. Given the strong mandate, it also implies that the people had rejected the previous government's policies and the stance going forward. Yes, there is agreement on the part of the government to continue the program, but the very people that you were trying to protect through already spoken against some of the taxes and lack of relief and growth issues. It would be IMF to the people who, the average people of Sri Lanka who voted this government into power.
Let me first turn to you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. So Marta will answer the question on the social spending. So the questions around the government, the mandate, regrettably, the challenges in Sri Lanka haven't gotten any less, despite in economic challenges. I'm covering from this in 2022. The effects of that will be felt for quite some time, and of course, one of the key underlying causes of the crisis was the lack of fiscal revenue. The tax revenue.
This is another